My mother convinced my fiancé to marry my cousin, saying, "He'll give you the life my son never could." I disappeared without a word. 7 months later, we met again at a lavish gala I hosted, and when they saw who my wife was, their smiles vanished. I, 31M, learned the hard way that the people you trust most can become your greatest enemies. 7 months ago, I walked into my apartment and found my fiancée sitting on the couch with tear-stained cheeks, my mother beside her with an arm around her shoulders. The scene looked innocent enough until I heard what my mother was saying. She was telling my fiancé that I would never be able to provide the life she deserved, that my cousin had a better job, better prospects, and better connections. My mother said I was too focused on my startup, too busy chasing dreams that would never materialize. She painted a picture of a struggling future with me versus a comfortable, luxurious life with him. The worst part was watching my fiancée nod along, her eyes flickering between my mother's face and the floor. I stood there frozen in the doorway, grocery bags still in my hands. Neither of them noticed me. My mother continued her pitch, explaining how my cousin had already expressed interest in my fiancé at the last family gathering, how he came from old money while I was building something from nothing. She made it sound like she was doing everyone a favor, like she was being practical rather than betraying her own son. I backed out silently and left. I didn't confront them, didn't make a scene, didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I simply disappeared. That night, I checked into a hotel and blocked both their numbers. I called off the wedding through my lawyer, citing irreconcilable differences. I withdrew from our joint accounts only what I had contributed, left the engagement ring in a courier envelope at my mother's doorstep, and instructed my lawyer to handle everything else. Within 48 hours, I had moved my essential belongings to a storage unit and relocated to a different city where my business partner lived. The startup I had been working on for 3 years was a tech platform connecting luxury service providers with high-net-worth individuals. My ex-fiancé thought it was a pipe dream. My mother called it a waste of my engineering degree. But my business partner and I had been on the verge of something big, and I threw myself into work with a ferocity that surprised even him. I worked 16-hour days. I networked relentlessly. I pitched to investors with a desperation that came from needing to prove everyone wrong. 2 months after I left, we secured our first major investment. A venture capital firm saw the potential my mother couldn't. For months in, we had partnerships with elite hotels, Michelin star restaurants, and private aviation companies across 3 countries. During this time, I met her. She was a consultant the VC firm sent to help us scale. She came from wealth, the kind my mother had always envied, but she never flaunted it. She was brilliant, driven, and understood the business in ways that impressed even our most skeptical board members. She pushed me to think bigger, to expand faster, to not settle for regional success when we could go global. We worked closely together for weeks before anything personal developed. She knew about my broken engagement, but never pried. Instead, she shared her own story of a failed relationship with someone who had wanted her family's money more than her. We bonded over long strategy sessions that turned into dinners, over shared ambitions, and the scars left by people who had underestimated us. 6 months after I left my old life behind, I proposed to her. Not with a grand gesture or a public display, but with a quiet conversation in her apartment where I told her I wanted to build an empire with her, not just a company. She said yes. We married 3 weeks later in a private ceremony with just our closest friends and business associates. No family drama, no elaborate planning, just 2 people choosing each other. The 7th month brought the gala. Our company was launching a premium tier service, and we decided to make it an event that would put us on the map. We rented out the ballroom of a 5-star hotel in my hometown, the same city I had fled 7 months earlier. We invited everyone who mattered in the luxury services industry, along with some key figures from my past whom I wanted to see again on my terms. I sent invitations to my mother and my cousin as a calculated move. I used my mother's maiden name on the invitation list, so she wouldn't connect it to me immediately. The invitation promised an exclusive preview of a revolutionary luxury platform, along with networking opportunities with industry leaders. My mother, who had always been obsessed with social status and connections, would never miss such an event. My cousin, who worked in finance and fancied himself a player in elite circles, would definitely attend. The gala was spectacular. crystal chandeliers, a string quartet, champagne that cost more per bottle than my old monthly rent, and catering from one of the restaurants on our platform. My wife looked stunning in a designer gown, every inch the successful executive she was. I wore a custom suit and felt like a different person from the one who had left 7 months ago. I positioned myself near the entrance with my wife, greeting guests as they arrived. My business partner handled the other side of the room, working the crowd like the pro he was. I watched the entrance, waiting. They arrived fashionably late, as I knew they would. My cousin wore an expensive suit that probably cost him a month's salary, trying to look like he belonged. My mother dripped in jewelry, some of it pieces my father had given her before he passed. And beside my cousin, holding his arm, was my ex-fiancée in a dress that was elegant but not quite right for the event, just a shade too informal. I watched them take in the venue, saw their impressed expressions as they surveyed the crowd of genuinely wealthy and influential people. My mother was already scanning for opportunities, that familiar calculating look in her eyes. My cousin puffed his chest out slightly, probably preparing his networking speech. My ex-fiancée looked nervous, clutching a small purse tightly. They made their way through the entrance, accepted champagne from a passing waiter, and began to mingle. I waited, letting them enjoy themselves for a while, letting them feel like they belonged in this world. My wife squeezed my hand, a gesture of support. She knew what this night meant to me. After about 20 minutes, I made my move. The MC took the stage and announced that the CEO and founder would say a few words. I walked up to the stage, the spotlight finding me immediately. I began speaking about the company's journey, about building something from nothing, about the importance of surrounding yourself with people who believed in your vision. I was 3 sentences in when I saw recognition dawn on my mother's face. Her champagne glass stopped halfway to her lips. Her eyes went wide, her mouth opening slightly in shock. My cousin noticed her reaction and followed her gaze to the stage, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. My ex-fiancée went pale, her hand flying to her throat. I continued my speech, not acknowledging them directly, but ensuring my story hit every point that would twist the knife. I talked about leaving behind negativity and doubt, about how sometimes you have to cut ties with people who don't see your worth, about finding a partner who builds you up instead of tearing you down. I gestured to my wife, inviting her to join me on stage. She glided up gracefully, and I introduced her as my co-founder and wife. The room erupted in polite applause. I mentioned her family's name, a name that even my mother would recognize as belonging to one of the wealthiest families in the region. I saw my mother's face lose all color. After the speech, my wife and I circulated through the crowd. We deliberately worked our way toward where my mother's group stood, though I maintained plausible deniability about it being intentional. We were simply greeting all our guests. When we finally reached them, I acted surprised. I expressed how unexpected it was to see them there, how small the world was. My mother's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. My cousin tried to muster some false bravado, extending his hand for a shake, while mumbling something about always knowing I had potential. I shook his hand with just enough firmness to make my point without being obvious. My ex-fiancée couldn't meet my eyes. She stared at her shoes, her face flushed with embarrassment. I introduced my wife to them, watching as they struggled to maintain composure. My wife was gracious and professional, treating them like she would any other guest, which somehow made it worse. There was no cattiness, no obvious judgment, just the polite courtesy of someone secure in her position. My mother finally found her voice and asked how I had managed all this. I explained briefly about the company's growth, about the investment and partnerships, about the hard work and long hours. I didn't mention how I had worked through the pain of betrayal, how I had channeled my anger into productivity, how every success had been partially fueled by the desire to prove her wrong. She tried to pivot, to claim she had always believed in me, that she had only wanted what was best. I cut her off politely, saying I needed to attend to other guests. My wife and I excused ourselves and moved on, leaving them standing there with their half-empty champagne glasses and shattered assumptions. The rest of the evening was a triumph. We secured 3 major new partnerships and got featured in 2 business publications covering the event. But the professional success wasn't what satisfied me most. It was the look on their faces, the realization that they had bet on the wrong horse, that they had traded authenticity for perceived stability and lost both. My cousin and ex-fiancée left early, slipping out before dinner was served. I learned later from a mutual acquaintance who attended that they had been arguing in hushed whispers near the coat check. My mother stayed longer, probably unable to leave without seeming rude, but she kept to the shadows, no longer trying to network or make connections. After the gala ended and we returned to our hotel suite, my wife asked if I felt the closure I had been seeking. I realized I did, but not in the way I expected. I had thought seeing them would feel triumphant, that proving them wrong would heal the wound. But standing there in my success with my incredible wife beside me, I realized they had actually done me a favor. If my fiancé had married me as planned, I would have spent my life with someone who didn't truly believe in me, who had been susceptible to my mother's manipulation. If my mother had supported me unconditionally, I might not have worked with such intensity and focus. Their betrayal had been the catalyst for everything good that followed. Update 1. The morning after the gala, my phone exploded with messages. My mother had somehow gotten my new number, probably from the company website's contact information. She sent a series of texts that evolved from defensive to apologetic to angry within the span of an hour. She claimed she had been trying to protect me from a bad marriage, that she could see my ex-fiancé wasn't right for me, that she had actually done me a favor. The mental gymnastics were impressive. My cousin sent an email to my work address attempting to discuss investment opportunities. He suddenly had clients who would be perfect for our platform, he claimed. He wanted to set up a lunch meeting to discuss potential collaboration. The transparent attempt to benefit from my success after dismissing it would have been laughable if it weren't so pathetic. The most surprising message came from my ex-fiancée. She sent a long letter through a mutual friend, explaining that she had made a terrible mistake. She said my mother had been very convincing, had shared financial documents that made my situation look worse than it was, had painted a picture of future hardship that terrified her. She claimed she realized her error within weeks, but was too ashamed to reach out, especially after the wedding to my cousin had been fast-tracked by my mother's insistence. She wrote that she was miserable, that my cousin wasn't the man they had all thought he was, that the wealth and stability had come with a price she hadn't anticipated. She didn't explicitly ask for forgiveness or reconciliation, but the subtext was clear. She wanted me to know she regretted everything. I didn't respond to any of them. I had my assistant filter all communications from their numbers and email addresses. I wasn't interested in explanations or apologies or sudden business opportunities. That chapter of my life was closed. What I didn't expect was my father's brother reaching out. He had attended the gala as a legitimate guest, someone with actual business connections, though I hadn't recognized him in the crowd. He called my office and left a message saying how proud he was, how he had always known I had it in me, and how disappointed he was in his sister-in-law's behavior. He didn't ask for anything, didn't try to leverage our connection, just expressed genuine happiness for my success. We ended up meeting for coffee a week later, and he shared some things about my family dynamics that made my mother's behavior make more sense, though not excusable. He explained that my mother had always felt inferior after marrying into my father's family. My father had been the successful one before he died, and she had been a homemaker who defined herself through his achievements. When he passed away and I was still in college, she had panicked about her social standing. She became obsessed with maintaining appearances and connections, with ensuring she remained relevant in the circles my father had moved in. My success through my own efforts, without leveraging my father's old connections, had threatened her narrative. She had tried to control my path, to push me toward traditional markers of success she understood, like corporate jobs and marriages to suitable families. When I chose to build a startup instead, to risk everything on an uncertain venture, it terrified her because she couldn't control or predict the outcome. My cousin had been her solution. He worked at an established firm, had a steady income, and represented the safe path she wished I had taken. When she saw my fiancé's doubts during a family dinner where my cousin had been particularly boastful about a recent bonus, she saw an opportunity to validate her own choices by steering my fiancé toward what she considered a better option. The irony was that my cousin's job, while stable, was middle management at best. He lived beyond his means to maintain an image, was drowning in debt from the lifestyle he thought he needed to project, and had been hoping my ex-fiancée came for money that could help him out. When he discovered she was just as middle class as he actually was beneath the facade, the marriage became strained almost immediately. This context helped me understand, but didn't excuse anything. My uncle made that clear too. He said understanding someone's motivations doesn't mean you owe them forgiveness, especially when they had actively sabotaged your happiness for their own peace of mind. Update 2. 3 months after the gala, the company expanded internationally. We opened offices in London and Singapore, and the platform became the go-to service for ultra-high-net-worth individuals across 3 continents. My wife and I were featured in a major business magazine as a power couple to watch, complete with a photo shoot and a lengthy article about our business philosophy and growth strategy. The article was picked up by several online publications and went viral in business circles, which meant my mother saw it. And so did everyone in my old social circle back home. My mother made one final attempt at contact. She showed up at our headquarters reception desk, demanding to see me. Security called my office, and I watched on the camera feed as she tried to convince them that she was my mother and had a right to see me. I instructed security to politely but firmly inform her that I was unavailable and that all family matters should go through my lawyer. She broke down in the lobby, crying and causing enough of a scene that security had to escort her out. I felt a twinge of something watching her cry, but it wasn't guilt. It was more like sadness for what could have been, for the mother-son relationship that should have existed but never really had. My wife stood beside me as we watched the security footage, her hand on my shoulder. She asked if I wanted to reconsider, if maybe enough time had passed for a conversation. I thought about it seriously for a few minutes before deciding that some bridges aren't worth rebuilding. My mother had shown me who she was when it mattered most, and I believed her. The most satisfying update came from that same mutual friend who had delivered my ex-fiancée's letter. She reached out again, this time with information I hadn't asked for, but found validating nonetheless. My cousin and ex-fiancée were getting divorced. The marriage had lasted less than 8 months. Apparently, once the novelty wore off and reality set in, they realized they had nothing in common and had married for all the wrong reasons. My ex-fiancé discovered my cousin's debt and his gambling problem, which he had hidden well during their courtship. My cousin discovered that my ex-fiancé came with no family money or connections, despite my mother's implications otherwise. The divorce was messy. My mother, who had pushed so hard for the marriage, was caught in the middle, with both parties blaming her for misleading them about what they were getting into. Her social standing in the family and community took a significant hit. People began to see her as a manipulator rather than the grieving widow trying to maintain her late husband's legacy. I felt no joy in their misery, but I felt no sympathy either. They had made their choices based on greed, status, and fear rather than love, respect, and partnership. The natural consequences of those choices weren't my responsibility. Meanwhile, my wife and I were thriving both professionally and personally. We bought a penthouse in the city, adopted a rescue dog, and started planning for the future we wanted to build together. She was 3 months pregnant, something we were keeping private for now, and every morning I woke up grateful that my old life had fallen apart. It had made room for something infinitely better. The story could end here as a perfect revenge tale where the wronged party rises from the ashes and finds success, while those who betrayed him suffer the consequences of their actions. But life is rarely that neat, and the real satisfaction wasn't in their downfall. It was in realizing I had built something meaningful with someone who truly valued me, that I had proven my worth to the only person whose opinion actually mattered, which was myself. I never spoke to my mother again. I never responded to my cousin's increasingly desperate attempts at connection as his life unraveled. I never acknowledged my ex-fiancée's regrets. I simply moved forward, and that indifference was the greatest revenge of all. They had become irrelevant to my story, background characters in a life they had thought I was incapable of achieving. 7 months had been enough time to transform everything. 7 months from devastating betrayal to vindication. 7 months from rock bottom to the top of my industry. 7 months to go from broken and betrayed to married to an incredible woman who was carrying our child. They had tried to write me off, and instead, I had written them out of my narrative entirely. And that was exactly how it should be. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with friends or family who might enjoy it too. Your support means a lot.